Everyone thinks Kansas is the most boring state in America. Flat fields, and nothing else, right? Wrong. This state sits on an ancient ocean full of shark fossils, stores Hollywood's most valuable films underground, survived more deadly shootouts than any Western movie, and somehow has more biodiversity than the Amazon rainforest. Kansas is hiding 50 secrets that will completely destroy everything you thought you knew about the heartland. And number 1 is going to blow your mind. At number 50, we need to talk about wheat. Kansas produces so much wheat every single year that it could make 36 billion loaves of bread. That is not a typo. 36 billion loaves. You could feed every single person on planet Earth for 2 entire weeks with just Kansas wheat alone. Think about that for a second. One state sitting in the middle of America, quietly feeding the entire world. The fields stretch for miles and miles, turning gold every summer, and most people drive right past without realizing they are looking at a global food supply powerhouse. Coming in at number 49, Kansas has more railroad track per square mile than any other state in America. This place is absolutely covered in train lines. You cannot go anywhere without crossing tracks. It is like the entire state was designed to move things fast and move them everywhere. And it makes sense when you think about it. All that wheat, all that cattle, all those goods need to get out of Kansas somehow. So the state became a massive railway hub, connecting the heartland to every corner of the country. Kansas is basically the shipping center of America. At number 48, here comes something wild. Scientists actually tested Kansas and proved it is flatter than a pancake. They compared the surface of Kansas to an actual pancake, and the state won, or lost, depending on how you look at it. Kansas is scientifically, measurably, flatter than breakfast food. But here is where it gets weird. Kansas has a mountain range. Yes, you heard that right. The same state that is flatter than a pancake also has mountains. They are not huge, but they exist. Kansas is out here defying its own reputation and confusing everyone at the same time. Number 47 takes us back to the wild days. Dodge City in the 1870s was so violent, so dangerous, so absolutely out of control, that its Boot Hill Cemetery completely filled up in just 5 years. 5 years. That is how many people were dying in shootouts and brawls. Boot Hill was where they buried the outlaws, the gunslingers, the troublemakers who died with their boots on. And Dodge City filled an entire cemetery in the time it takes you to finish college. The Wild West was not a movie. It was real, and it was brutal. At number 46, we have the world's largest ball of twine sitting in Cawker City. It weighs over 20,000 pounds. Someone started rolling twine into a ball, and the town just kept going. Year after year, adding more twine, making it bigger, turning it into a legitimate tourist attraction. And people actually visit this thing. They take pictures with it. They add their own twine to it. It is one of those wonderfully bizarre American roadside attractions that makes you ask why, but also makes you want to see it for yourself. Kansas knows how to embrace the weird. Number 45 is going to mess with your head. Kansas City. Kansas is not the capital of Kansas. That honor goes to Topeka. But even crazier, Kansas City, Kansas is not even the largest Kansas City. Kansas City, Missouri, is bigger, has more people, and gets all the attention. Imagine living in a city named after your state. And it is not even the main version of that city. The Missouri side took over, grew larger, and basically stole the spotlight. Kansas City. Kansas is like the little sibling that shares a name but lives in the shadow. Coming in at number 44. Kansas sits on massive helium reserves. Most of North America's helium supply comes from Kansas. Every party balloon, every scientific experiment, every medical procedure that needs helium, it probably came from underground in Kansas. The state is literally floating on helium. And helium is rare, like really rare. It is the second lightest element in the universe, and it escapes into space once it is released. Kansas has one of the few places on Earth where helium is trapped underground, making this state incredibly valuable for science and industry. At number 43, Pizza Hut started in a tiny shack in Wichita. Two brothers borrowed $600 from their mom, opened a small pizza joint, and created one of the world's largest pizza chains. From a shack in Kansas to thousands of locations across the globe. That is the American dream right there. The original building still exists. It is a landmark now. You can visit the exact spot where Pizza Hut was born. Kansas took Italian food, made it fast and affordable, and sent it around the world. A small shack in Wichita changed how millions of people eat pizza. Number 42 is genuinely haunting. Kansas has more than 6,000 ghost towns. That is more ghost towns than Kansas has active cities right now. Entire communities that once thrived, that had schools and churches and businesses, now just sit empty and crumbling across the plains. These towns died when the railroads changed routes, when the economy shifted, when people moved away. Now they are just shells. Empty buildings with broken windows, streets with no traffic, signs faded by decades of sun and wind. Kansas is full of places that time forgot. At number 41, Kansas holds the geographic center of the contiguous United States. Near a town called Lebanon, there is a marker showing the exact middle point of the lower 48 states. If you drew lines from coast to coast and border to border, they would cross right there in Kansas. It makes sense that Kansas is the center. It is surrounded by other states, sitting in the middle of everything. But there is something powerful about standing at that marker and realizing you are at the heart of the country. Kansas is literally the center of it all. Coming in at number 40, Amelia Earhart was born in Atchison, Kansas. The most famous female aviator in history, the woman who broke barriers and inspired generations, started her life in a small Kansas town. She grew up watching trains and dreaming of flying. Earhart became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. She set records, challenged gender norms, and became an icon. And it all began in Kansas, in a state that most people think is too flat and boring to produce legends. Kansas raised a woman who conquered the skies. At number 39, Kansas officially abolished slavery before the Civil War even ended. The state constitution banned slavery from the very beginning. Kansas was born free. It was a battleground over slavery before it even became a state, and when it finally joined the Union, it chose freedom. The fight over slavery in Kansas was so intense it was called Bleeding Kansas. People died over whether this state would be free or slave. And Kansas chose freedom, making it one of the most progressive places in America at a time when the nation was tearing itself apart. Number 38 is going to make you nervous if you ever visit Kansas. The state experiences more tornadoes per 10,000 square miles than any other state in America. Not just more tornadoes overall, more tornadoes per square mile. Kansas is Tornado Alley on steroids. Every spring and summer, the conditions are perfect for tornadoes. Warm air from the Gulf, cool air from Canada, flat land with nothing to stop the wind. Kansas sits right in the middle of nature's perfect storm factory, and the twisters just keep coming, year after year. At number 37, Sumner County has produced more Miss Americas than any other county in the entire country. One small county in Kansas keeps sending beauty queens to the national stage. Something in the water there is creating pageant winners left and right. It is one of those strange statistical anomalies that nobody can fully explain. Sumner County just keeps winning. Maybe it is the culture. Maybe it is the training. Maybe it is pure coincidence. But the numbers do not lie. Kansas has a Miss America factory. Coming in at number 36, Kansas farmers produce enough wheat in 1 year to fill a train stretching from Kansas to California and back. Picture that, a train loaded with wheat, traveling across mountains and deserts, reaching the Pacific Ocean, turning around, and coming all the way back. That is 1 year. Kansas is not just producing food for America. It is producing food for the world. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Fields as far as you can see, all growing wheat, all being harvested, all being shipped out. Kansas feeds nations without most people ever noticing. At number 35, the first woman mayor in America was elected in Argonia, Kansas in 1887. Her name was Susanna Salter. She did not even want to run. Someone put her name on the ballot as a joke, and she won. Kansas accidentally made history. Salter served her term, did a good job, and proved that women could lead just as well as men. This was 33 years before women could even vote nationally. Kansas gave a woman power when the rest of the country was still debating whether women deserved a voice. Number 34 takes us underground. Kansas has a massive underground salt mine that is used to store Hollywood movie negatives and important documents. Deep below the surface, in cool, dry conditions, some of the most valuable films and records in history are being preserved. It is the perfect storage environment. Stable temperature, low humidity, protected from natural disasters. Kansas is quietly protecting cultural treasures that the world cannot afford to lose. If Hollywood ever needs the original negatives, they come to Kansas. At number 33, the state capitol building in Topeka has more square feet than the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., Kansas. Built a capitol so large, it makes the national one look small. The dome, the hallways, the chambers, everything is massive. It took over a century to finish the dome. They started building in 1866 and did not complete the dome until 2002. Generations of Kansans watched that building slowly take shape. Now it stands as one of the grandest state capitals in America. Coming in at number 32, liberal Kansas hosts an annual pancake race against Olney, England. This tradition dates back to 1950. Two towns, separated by an ocean, racing while flipping pancakes. It is absurd and wonderful, and Kansas commits to it every single year. The women run through the streets with frying pans, flipping pancakes as they go. The town that finishes first wins bragging rights until next year. Kansas found a way to turn breakfast into an international competition, only in America. At number 31, Kansas has its own little house on the prairie site where Laura Ingalls Wilder lived as a child. The cabin, the land, the setting of those beloved books. It is all in Kansas. Generations grew up reading those stories without realizing they happened right here. You can visit the site, see where Laura played, where her family struggled and survived. Kansas was the backdrop for one of America's most iconic stories about frontier life. The prairie that Laura described still exists, still stretches to the horizon. Number 30 connects Kansas to one of the most famous lines in movie history. The phrase "there is no place like home" from The Wizard of Oz refers to Kansas. Dorothy wanted to go home to Kansas. Not California, not New York, but Kansas. The movie made Kansas famous as the place worth returning to. Home was not the magical land of Oz with its wonders and adventures. Home was Kansas with its simplicity and family. That one line changed how the world thinks about this state forever. At number 29, Atchison is considered one of the most haunted towns in America. The same town where Amelia Earhart was born is also crawling with ghost stories. People report seeing apparitions, hearing voices, feeling cold spots in buildings all over town. One of the most famous haunted houses in the country sits in Atchison. The Sally House has been featured on paranormal shows, investigated by ghost hunters, and terrified visitors for decades. Kansas has ghosts, and Atchison has a lot of them. Coming in at number 28, Kansas produces enough grain sorghum to rank first in the nation every single year, not just wheat. Kansas is also dominating sorghum production. This crop feeds livestock, makes biofuel, and creates food products around the world. Kansas is an agricultural powerhouse in multiple categories. Wheat gets the attention, but sorghum is just as important. Farmers here have mastered growing crops in conditions that would defeat other states. Kansas just keeps producing food no matter what. At number 27, the world's first Pizza Hut building now sits on the Wichita State University campus as a landmark. They moved the original shack to the campus so students and visitors can see where it all began. Kansas is so proud of Pizza Hut, they gave it a permanent home. It is a tiny building, almost comically small compared to modern Pizza Huts, but it represents something bigger. It shows that major businesses can start anywhere, even in a small shack in the middle of Kansas. Dreams do not need skyscrapers to begin. Number 26 takes us to Nicodemus, the oldest surviving African-American settlement west of the Mississippi River. After the Civil War, formerly enslaved people moved west to build new lives. They founded Nicodemus in 1877 and created a community that still exists today. Nicodemus represents hope, resilience, and the pursuit of freedom. These settlers faced incredible hardships, but built schools, churches, and farms. Kansas became home to a community that refused to give up. The town stands as a testament to courage and determination. At number 25, Kansas is one of only 3 states that ban teachers from striking. Teachers cannot walk out, cannot protest with strikes, cannot use that tool to fight for better conditions. Kansas put this into law and has never changed it. This creates tension and debate. Teachers argue they need the right to strike. The state argues education cannot be interrupted. Kansas sits in the middle of this ongoing conflict, balancing the rights of workers against the needs of students. Coming in at number 24, Kansas has a post-rock limestone belt, where settlers built entire fences from stone, because trees were scarce. The prairie had almost no wood, so people adapted. They cut limestone into posts and built fences that still stand today. These stone fences define the Kansas landscape. They line roads, mark property boundaries, and tell the story of settlers who refused to let the lack of trees stop them. Kansas turned stone into solution and created something unique in American history. At number 23, Hutchinson has massive underground salt caverns used to store original film reels of Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. Two of the most important films ever made are sitting in a salt mine in Kansas. Hollywood trusts Kansas with its treasures. The caverns are enormous, stable, and perfect for long-term storage. Temperature stays constant, humidity is controlled, and the films are protected from decay. Kansas is quietly preserving cinema history, while most of the world has no idea these movies are underground. Number 22 creates an interesting contrast. Kansas ranks first in the nation for wheat production, but does not grow a single coffee bean. Yet the state has a thriving coffee culture. Cafes and coffee shops are everywhere. Kansas grows grain but drinks coffee imported from thousands of miles away. It shows how connected the world is. Kansas sends wheat around the globe and brings back coffee from Central America and Africa. The state feeds the world with bread, while the world keeps Kansas caffeinated. Trade works both ways. At number 21, the world's deepest hand-dug well is in Greensburg, Kansas at 109 feet deep. Someone dug this well by hand, one shovel at a time, going deeper and deeper until they hit 109 feet. No machines, no modern equipment, just human determination. It took years to dig. The effort was incredible. The dedication was unmatched. Kansas needed water, and somebody decided to dig until they found it. That well still exists as proof that people can achieve impossible things when they refuse to quit. Coming in at number 20, Kansas has more acres of sunflowers than any other state in America. Fields of bright yellow flowers cover the landscape every summer. They grow for oil, for seeds, for beauty. Kansas turns the prairie into a sea of yellow. Driving through Kansas during sunflower season is breathtaking. The flowers follow the sun, all turning the same direction, creating patterns that stretch to the horizon. Kansas is not just wheat and corn. Kansas is color and life and natural beauty. At number 19, the state's name comes from the Kansa Native American tribe, meaning people of the south wind. The original inhabitants named themselves after the wind that blows across these plains. Kansas honors them by keeping that name. The Kansa people understood this land long before settlers arrived. They knew the wind, the weather, the rhythms of the prairie. Kansas carries their legacy in its name, reminding everyone that this place belonged to native peoples first. Number 18 brings us to White Castle, America's first fast food hamburger chain, founded in Wichita in 1921. Before McDonald's, before Burger King, there was White Castle serving small square burgers in Kansas. Fast food as we know it started right here. White Castle revolutionized how Americans ate. Quick, cheap, consistent burgers available to everyone. The chain spread across the country, but it all began in Wichita. Kansas gave America fast food and changed the restaurant industry forever. At number 17, Kansas executed the last public hanging west of the Mississippi River in 1965. Yes, 1965. Not the 1800s, not the early 1900s, but 1965. Kansas was still doing public executions when the Beatles were topping the charts. It seems impossible that public hangings happened so recently, but Kansas held onto this method longer than almost anywhere else. The execution marked the end of an era, the final chapter of Old West justice in modern America. Coming in at number 16, the Geodetic Center of North America is in Osborne County, Kansas. This is the reference point used for all mapping and surveying across the continent. Every map, every GPS coordinate, every geographical measurement ties back to this spot in Kansas. Kansas is literally the foundation of how we measure North America. Surveyors, cartographers, and scientists all use this point as their baseline. Without this spot in Kansas, our maps would not work. The state anchors our understanding of where everything else is. At number 15, Kansas produces enough beef cattle annually to rank third in the nation behind only Texas and Nebraska. Massive feedlots, sprawling ranches, thousands of cattle moving through the system every year. Kansas is a major player in America's beef industry. The cattle industry drives the Kansas economy. From ranchers to processors to distributors, thousands of jobs depend on beef. Kansas turns grass and grain into protein, feeding Americans and exporting beef around the world. The state is built on cattle. Number 14 takes us back to Dodge City. Front Street is so authentic that it was used as a reference for designing Western movie sets. When Hollywood needed to recreate the Old West, they looked at Dodge City. Kansas became the blueprint for cowboy movies. The buildings, the layout, the whole atmosphere of Front Street captured what the Wild West actually looked like. Movie makers studied Dodge City and tried to recreate its authenticity. Kansas gave Hollywood the visual language of Westerns. At number 13, Kansas has no natural lakes. Every single lake in the state is man-made. Not one natural lake exists within Kansas borders. Every body of water you see was created by damming rivers or digging reservoirs. Kansas manufactured all its lakes. This seems impossible for such a large state, but the geology and geography just did not create natural lakes. So Kansas built them. Dams went up, valleys flooded, and lakes appeared. The state refused to go without water recreation, and simply made its own. Coming in at number 12, the state song Home on the Range was written by two Kansans and became so popular it was considered for the national anthem. This simple song about the prairie almost became the official song of America. Kansas nearly defined the country. The song captures the spirit of the West. Open spaces, buffalo, clear skies. It resonated with people across the nation. Even though it did not become the national anthem, Home on the Range remains one of the most recognizable American songs ever written. At number 11, Garden City has one of the largest meat packing plants in the world, processing thousands of cattle daily. The scale is enormous. Cattle arrive, move through the facility, and emerge as packaged beef ready for stores. Kansas turns livestock into dinner plates. The plant employs thousands of people and processes an amount of beef that is hard to comprehend. Garden City sits in the middle of cattle country, making it the perfect location. Kansas beef flows out of this plant to grocery stores across America. Number 10 gets controversial. Kansas once tried to ban teaching evolution in schools twice. The state went back and forth on whether evolution should be taught. Science versus religion played out in Kansas classrooms, making national headlines both times. The debate divided the state. Some wanted strict adherence to religious beliefs. Others demanded scientific education. Kansas became a battleground over what children should learn about human origins. Eventually, science won, but the fight was intense and ugly. At number 9, the Dalton Gang's final robbery attempt in Coffeyville ended in the death of 4 gang members in just 12 minutes. The gang tried to rob 2 banks at once. The townspeople fought back. Gunfire erupted. In 12 minutes, the Dalton Gang was destroyed. The shootout was brutal and fast. Bodies fell in the streets. The gang never expected regular citizens to fight so hard. Coffeyville refused to be victims, and Kansas turned outlaws into history. That 12-minute gunfight ended one of the West's most notorious gangs. Coming in at number 8, Kansas has more certified barbers per capita than any state in America. For some reason, Kansas produces more professional barbers than anywhere else. The state takes haircuts seriously. Barber schools thrive here, and Kansas keeps people looking sharp. Nobody knows exactly why Kansas has so many barbers. Maybe it is the culture, maybe it is the training programs, maybe people here just really care about grooming. Whatever the reason, Kansas leads the nation in making sure everyone gets a good haircut. At number 7, Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th president, grew up in Abilene, Kansas. The man who led Allied forces in World War II and then became president started his life in small-town Kansas. Eisenhower learned leadership and character on the Kansas prairie. His childhood home still stands in Abilene. You can visit the house where a future president grew up. Kansas shaped Eisenhower, gave him the values that carried him through war and politics. Small-town Kansas produced one of America's greatest leaders. Number 6 brings us back to the state capital. The dome in Topeka was not completed until 2002, which was 113 years after construction began. Over a century passed between breaking ground and finishing the dome. Multiple generations watched and waited. Budget problems, design changes, political fights, everything delayed the dome. But Kansas never gave up. They kept working, kept funding, kept building. When the dome finally topped out in 2002, it marked the end of one of the longest construction projects in state history. At number 5, Kansas City, Missouri, has more of the metro area's population than Kansas City, Kansas. Despite Kansas being in the name, the Kansas side lost the population battle. Missouri took the name and ran with it, growing larger and more prominent. It is one of the strangest geographic naming situations in America. Kansas City is mostly in Missouri. The Kansas version exists, but lives in the shadow. Two states share a name, but only one gets the glory. Kansas has to watch Missouri claim its city. Coming in at number 4, Wild Bill Hickok became Marshal of Abilene, and only killed 2 men during his entire tenure despite the town's violent reputation. The legend was bigger than the reality. Hickok kept order mostly through reputation and intimidation. He rarely needed his guns. Hollywood made Hickok into a killing machine. The truth is he was effective because people feared him, not because he shot everyone. Kansas had a marshal who controlled a violent town with just 2 killings. Sometimes the legend creates more peace than the violence ever could. At number 3, the largest contiguous tall grass prairie in North America exists in the Flint Hills of Kansas. This is the last major stretch of original prairie, the ecosystem that once covered the Great Plains. Kansas preserved what the rest of the country destroyed. The Flint Hills roll and dip, covered in grass that grows taller than a person. Bison used to roam here by the millions. Now cattle graze where buffalo once wandered. Kansas protected this landscape, keeping a piece of prehistoric America alive in the modern world. Number 2 is going to blow your mind. Kansas literally sits on an ancient ocean floor, and you can still find marine fossils throughout the state. Millions of years ago, an ocean covered Kansas. Sharks, fish, and marine reptiles swam where corn grows today. People find shark teeth in Kansas. They find ancient shells and fossilized sea creatures in the middle of the prairie. Kansas is an ocean that dried up and became land. The evidence is everywhere if you know where to look. The state is proof that Earth changes. At number 1, despite its reputation for being flat and boring, Kansas has more biodiversity in the Flint Hills than the entire Amazon rainforest per square kilometer. This is the big one. Kansas beats the Amazon in biodiversity density. The prairie is more diverse than the jungle. Scientists counted species after species in the tall grass prairie. Plants, insects, birds, mammals. The variety is staggering. Kansas looks simple, but hides incredible complexity. The state everyone dismisses as boring is actually one of the most biologically rich places on Earth. Kansas wins.